This is Sal for Drunk Nerd Sober Nerd, and you've made it to part 4 of every comic book movie ever ranked. We're almost to the last part and are well into the films that are actually cohesive and worth watching. I do realize you may be saying to yourself, hey, what are the criteria for this ranking? You can rest assured knowing that there is a complex scoring system based on performances, cinematography, direction, writing, amongst many other things. And the most important factor of all, how much I personally like watching the movie. So yeah, very scientific. Anyway, when I got to this point in the viewing portion of this project, it was a relief to finally not want to stick my head in a blender for once. Here's hoping you feel the same. Beware, spoilers for all the things, and let's get started with number 64.
America, dude, learn the rules.
This film might feel out of place on this list, but it's not a superhero film countdown, it's a comic book movie countdown. And this is a particularly good one. These things don't all have to be about a blue laser shooting into the sky or the world ending or even heroics for that matter. The film had me really identifying with characters who don't have a path in life, and finding humor in the absurdity around them is their escape. Introverted and flawed teenage and adult characters who don't belong is something universal, especially to a comic book fan, which is why this one became a cult classic. 63. After winning a bunch of Oscars with Pan's Labyrinth, Guillermo del Toro was given free rein to go apeshit with the Hellboy sequel. Sequences don't drag on as much as the first film, and we're given more time to develop characters, especially Abe. This film is gorgeous, imaginative, colorful, and underrated. I think it just got buried, it had no chance. It was released right after Iron Man and just before The Dark Knight. 62. This is a worthy follow-up to the first Kick-Ass. Chloe Grace Moretz as Hit Girl is the best part of these films. And she's older now, so the charm of a little violent cursing kid isn't the same, but she's still excellent and leaves you wanting more Hit Girl.
Game on, cocksuckers!
The movie felt a little different, had a different director, but it was still awesome. I just wish Jim Carrey was in it a little more. His addition was a huge highlight.
Ow, it hurts! Yeah, there's a dog on your balls.
61. Aquaman had me laughing my ass off through the entire movie. I don't think that was their intention, but that's what happened. This movie is so fucking stupid. So why did I rank it so high? Well, it's stupidly entertaining. For every goofy, cringeworthy moment, there's an equally fun, epic moment. First off, they deserve credit for going full comic book with the costumes and lore. They clearly spent an ass ton of money on effects and actors. There's more movie in this movie than any other movie. It's amazing seeing this ridiculous dialogue coming out of Nicole Kidman and Julie Andrews, and I love the Indiana Jones stuff. I honestly can't explain it. This movie's just so fucking terrible, I loved it. Side note, DC, if you're gonna cast Jason Momoa as one of your characters, why not Lobo? He like is Lobo. 60. I actually debated putting this film on the list. Is it a movie based on a comic book? No, it's a movie about Harvey Pekar, the guy who made the comic book. But the thing is, the comic book was about the life of Harvey Pekar, so chicken or the egg or something. What Ghost World does for misplaced youth and the socially awkward, American Splendor does for genuine nerds and the truly peculiar.
I consider myself a nerd, and this movie has uplifted me.
The film's real charm comes from its characters and was made with true love and appreciation for the source material. 59. You know, I remember the first time I watched Batman Returns, and I had a strange feeling afterward.
It was puberty.
This film feels way more Tim Burton-ish than the original Batman. It has that really dark fairy tale quality that he's known for. Michelle Pfeiffer and Danny DeVito go above and beyond and are awesome in their roles, even though the script doesn't quite get either character right as far as their comic personalities.
Meow.
It's pretty weird even for a Batman film.
Just the pussy I've been looking for.
Parents, sponsors, and toy companies were mortified, which led to the shit show that followed. The score to this film is absolutely gorgeous. I recommend just listening to it on its own, as it's some of Danny Elfman's best work, especially this scene. 58.
Gentlemen, is that man all right?
Yeah! This is the granddaddy of the modern superhero film. It set the precedent for what these films could be if given the proper budget and talent. It might be bright and cheesy by today's standards, but it's nice that the world doesn't hate Superman for just being an alien like they do in the new movies. They love him. The lack of those complications and baggage is kind of refreshing. At the time, this movie was a filmmaking marvel. It's beautifully shot and scored, so why isn't it ranked higher on the list? Well, first, as a kid watching the film with my father, the "Can You Read My Mind" poem scene drove us nuts. It felt like it went on forever, and it's even worse watching it now. Although I'm grateful they didn't go with the original plan of having Margot Kidder sing the lines.
You read my mind.
Also, Superman flying so hard it spins the Earth back in time was ridiculous to me even as a child, as were these perverted soldiers.
Having trouble breathing, sir. What do you think? Well, I suggest vigorous chest massage. If that doesn't work, mouth to mouth. Yes, sir. Sergeant, I won't have one of my men doing anything I wouldn't be prepared to do myself. Yeah, but sir, get an ambulance. All right, men, gather around.
Wow.
There's only one P in rapist.
My nitpicking loses the film some points, but it just can't take away from its legacy.
Yeah!
57. I went into Big Hero 6 thinking, okay, this is just going to be a watchable kids movie. It was much, much more than that. Sure, it's geared towards kids, but there's a lot of love here for parents and non-parenting adults alike. It draws you right in from the beginning with solid characters that you're made to care about, a love for science, and scenes that make us feel emotion. Not to mention one of the most lovable comic relief characters ever. You should give Big Hero 6 a chance if you were like me and you just never got around to it. 56. Sure, it might seem like it's just a dopey kids movie with rubber suits and animatronic faces, but this was the best Turtles movie by far. It was imagined as a perfect hybrid between the comics and the cartoon, and it was treated seriously. I know it's not Citizen Kane, but the people that made it believed in it, even when the studios didn't. It's dark, dirty, gritty, and sometimes violent. So much so that parents complained in droves, which led to the watered-down sequel. The plot is solid, there are stakes, like death and comas. Characters have feeling to them, and it manages to be fun while not treating kids like they can't handle anything. Take that, Michael Bay, you 55? If you didn't know A History of Violence was based on a graphic novel, don't feel so bad. Neither did David Cronenberg, the director. He didn't find out till after he had done the rewrites, and even then refused to read it because he felt like it had become its own thing. And it is. I can't quite put my finger on it, but all I can say is it feels awkward. It's an awkward film, but in a good way. It's got visceral performances by an impressive cast, it's got a 69 scene, so that's cool, and it showcases a simple but powerful story. 54. The first film had a goofy, messy tone, so hire James Mangold, a director with some amazing work under his belt who's no stranger to a serious tone. Taking Wolverine to Japan and telling a more personal story is exactly the recovery the franchise needed. It's slow-paced for most of the film, but in this case, I don't think that's a bad thing. Honestly, I really enjoy this film, except for the last 15 minutes, which are kinda dopey. It's brimming with potential, and thankfully it did just well enough for the same team to make another one, which did not disappoint. 53. Here's a very rare example of a film doing a completely silly version of the comic, and it actually working out as a good thing. The comic is an extremely violent, bloody murder fest. It's really fucked up. So much so that the movie version was originally planned as a horror film. And Jim Carrey's character, Stanley Ipkiss, dies early on in the story, and Kellaway, the cop, actually becomes the mask and the main character. So they made more of a cartoony love story comedy, but it's still great. Like, really great. You can tell by the crappy sets that the budget was really low and mostly spent on effects, but they did so much with so little. 52. Just like 300, Sin City isn't so much an adaptation as it is a translation. I just kinda love that a direct, nearly shot-for-shot representation of a graphic novel can exist like this. It's cool, it's got a badass cast, especially Mickey Rourke, and it still holds up surprisingly. 51. Guillermo del Toro made a Blade movie. Goyer! Ron Perlman is in it, Donnie Yen is in it. Yeah, it's excellent.
Yeah, well, some of us can't see in the dark, you fucking nipplehead. What am I supposed to do?
As you'd expect from Del Toro, it was more of a monster movie than an action horror film. He had Luke Goss kind of play the same character again in Hellboy 2, but hey, it was effective. I'll buy that again. Yeah, watch this movie, it rules.
Get you later.
50? I definitely wanted more Kingsman after the first film, and this one was a ton of fun. If it suffered from anything though, it was just that it was a little bit too much. Like way too many subplots. They took that classic church fight scene from the first film and they just did it too many times here. Like it became the style of every major action sequence, which felt like overkill. It wasn't special anymore. It was a bloated film, but it was still a party, and the over-the-top insanity version of James Bond is pretty cool to watch. This was also bumped up a few slots on this list simply because of the Elton John scenes. It's worth watching this movie just for that alone. 49. Dredd is nothing like the original Stallone film.
You betray the law!
Instead, they told a more violent but simple small story that reminds you more of The Raid or even Die Hard. They do this really cool slow-mo effect, and slow-mo is generally overused, but in this they actually had a story reason to use it. Cersei is excellent as always, and Karl Urban, credit where it's due for not having an actor ego and keeping the helmet on throughout the whole film, true to the character. There's a rumor out there that we're getting a Karl Urban-led Dredd series. Fingers crossed. 48. A modern classic in every way, and it has that Barry Sonnenfeld feel to it. What do I mean by that? Watch this and The Addams Family back to back and you'll get it. Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith are fantastic and the writing is full of charm. The CG effects have not aged well, but the practical effects are unbelievable. It really still looks like Vincent D'Onofrio is an alien wearing a corpse, partially due to how awesome of an actor he is as well.
Oh, take me here!
47.
It tastes like coconut.
Sitting down to watch the worst Iron Man movie is like not getting your favorite donut out of the box.
I'm gonna have to ask you to exit the donut.
It's still a fucking donut, and it's a delicious treat, so shut up and eat it. Sure, the story was a little stilted, but it was loaded with great moments and introduced War Machine and Black Widow and maybe technically Spider-Man. The story shines though when dealing with the Tony and Pepper relationship. Sam Rockwell is perfect as an anti-Tony Stark, and Mickey Rourke is interesting. I wish we got to see more of him, but instead they made him into another big Iron Man suit guy villain. But let's be honest, Robert Downey Jr. is the reason why these films are what they are in the first place. 46.
Right.
The first Thor was a fish out of water story with Thor on Earth not knowing what anything is. The second Thor is a fish out of water story with Natalie Portman on Asgard not knowing what anything is. But there was more to it than that, of course. The task of grounding Thor and making him realistic and relatable has got to be a tough job, and it's done really well here. It's beautifully shot, there's more Asgard, which is what I wanted from the first one. There's more humor, more Loki. It's a goddamn solid outing for Thor. The only reason it wasn't that memorable? Really weak villain. Just a bad evil guy. He wants to turn the universe into a dark, evil place. A generic and weak villain can really hurt an otherwise decent film. 45. Hellboy was a totally different type of comic book movie with Del Toro's fingerprints all over it. Ron Perlman was born for this part. The studio considered Vin Diesel for it. That's hard to imagine. Thank goodness that didn't happen. I thought the love triangle part was dumb and unnecessary and did the Myers character kind of a disservice, but there's not much else to complain about. Hellboy is pretty awesome. 44. While the general direction of the Superman character in the DC universe isn't always handled the way I'd like, I genuinely like Henry Cavill as Superman, and Man of Steel gets a lot of it right. Well, the first two acts are fantastic, and then it turns to poop. The Krypton sequence is breathtaking. Attention, launch the space dicks into the sky vagina. The film's a fun ride until the third act, and it turns into an overzealous destruction punch fest, killing hundreds and thousands of people. The action gets to be too much, it goes on for way too long, and then you start to zone out after a while. This lady can't even right now. You would think the more Superman action the better until you actually get it, and then you realize less is more. This whole tentacle scene shit, this should have been completely cut out. It has no bearing on anything. But overall, I'd say the coolness outweighs the bad. The Russell Crowe stuff is excellent, and Hans Zimmer's score is some of my favorite movie music ever, especially considering the task of having to replace the iconic classic Superman theme. 43. The Earth storyline of Thor was a little derivative and all too familiar, but familiarity may have been necessary in order to ground it. The Asgard parts, however, were Shakespearean in nature and way more interesting. We didn't get as much of that until the sequel, but we got a Hawkeye cameo, and one of the best things the early MCU had going for it was its great villain, Tom Hiddleston's Loki, a character that continued to grow and entertain for years. I never quite bought the love story, even though Natalie Portman is amazing. I just never got why Thor was so hung up on this woman he barely knew, especially when... This was a solid and important step for the MCU to take and build on, even if it did have too many Dutch angles and Thor's eyebrows were dyed blonde. 42. Captain Marvel was good. Solid. There was a lot of fun to be had here. Brie Larson is a great actress, but came across a little wooden, but with flashes of brilliance. Our main character starts off as a stoic lady with no memory, and ends as stoic lady with memories, and she glows now. She has no pathos and nothing to draw you in. Also, the fights are a little hard to follow, they're just cut kinda strangely. I chalk both of these problems up to two directors with zero big film experience, and I think in 2019 we're used to a little bit more from these films at this point in the game. If you stick this film in Phase 1, 2011, it's great, but big props to Marvel for giving these films to directors with little experience but a lot of vision. I was genuinely surprised by what they did with the Skrulls. Dug that, and I got really excited when I thought they were building towards killing Nick Fury and having Ben Mendelsohn's character replace him, which would have had an incredible effect on the previous 20 films in the series. But no, I was let down. They didn't do that. All that said, I am looking forward to more from this character. I'm hoping she grows into herself beyond what we're given here, much like Thor and Doctor Strange before her. 41.
It's Spider-Man!
Looking back, it seems goofy and a little quaint, but at the time, this was a major milestone. We didn't care that the hero was constantly crying, or that the female lead kept cheating on every guy she was dating throughout the trilogy, or that the villain looked like a Power Ranger thing, or that it had a Nickelback song, or that Norman Osborn got really creepy with Aunt May. It was bright and colorful and full of action, and it had heart.
The heart, Osborn.
For the first time, altitude and speed felt real in a way no other film was able to convey. And more importantly, it showed studios that a film like this could make $1 billion. When I saw this in the theater, I immediately snuck into the next showing with my friend and we watched it again. Purists complained about Spider-Man's organic web shooters, but this never bothered me. It kind of makes more sense. If I had one question for Sam Raimi though, I'd ask why J. Jonah Jameson was specifically watching a program about AIDS in his office. I mean, it would make sense that he would just be watching the news in his office, but this is a film. This was a choice that had to be planned and queued up take after take. Just seems like an odd and very specific placement. Okay, I'll let it go. 40. Kick-Ass is really unique in that the screenplay and the comic book were actually written at the same time. They're different where they need to be, but they share the same spirit by design. This movie's so damn fun and it manages to use its extreme violence in wildly funny ways. Hit Girl is kinda terrifying at times, and she steals the whole thing. It's her movie and her character is just crazy. I know this sounds weird, but this is actually one of my favorite Nicolas Cage performances of all time. He pulls off this cheesy Flanders-like dad thing, and then slips into this ridiculous Adam West thing.
I rerouted your IP address. Finding you was way too easy.
Oh, and he does this thing again. It's weird that both of these guys went on to play two versions of the same character a few years later. Kick-Ass is underrated and really a blast to watch every time. 39.
Sleep. Who gave the order to attack?
Herr Strucker is the Avengers.
It's not the most cohesive MCU film. It sort of feels bloated and rushed at times, but there is so much to love here as well. Great world building, character exploration, and action, especially the Hulkbuster scene.
I'm sorry.
I find my favorite moments, though, are the non-action parts. Just characters having dialogue and chemistry with each other is when this film shines the most. And then Vision shows up. As a comic book fan, this was so exciting, and even after the first Avengers film, I never thought we'd actually get to see the Vision as a member of the team in the movies. It just seemed too far-fetched, but we got it, and he rules. 38! The first Ant-Man was the light, fun heist movie we needed after Ultron, and Ant-Man and the Wasp was the light, fun heist movie we needed after a morbid and heavy Infinity War. Giving Evangeline Lilly more of the spotlight was exactly what the series needed. Her character rules. She rules, it rules. Also doing ruling is Michelle Pfeiffer, great choice. Paul Rudd does his Paul Rudd thing, I guess. That's still fun. I love that the series spends time finding new ways to play around with its characters' powers. The villain, she was cool. There have been far worse villains, but she's not on par with what Marvel had been doing in the previous 4 films. This film's very jokey, some of it doesn't quite land, and most of the story revolves around a tiny building getting stolen over and over again, but hey, it's a fun time. 37. If you were a teenager in the mid-90s, you definitely owned 2 things: a Crow poster and the Crow soundtrack. Brandon Lee was inspiring. Replicating the combination of what he and Alex Proyas accomplished here has been attempted many times, and it has never come close. Ultimately, this classic teaches us some beautiful life lessons. Killing isn't always bad, because despite what Professor X says,
Killing sure will not bring you peace.
getting revenge does actually bring you peace. And unlike the message of a million other movies, murdering the bad guy will bring your loved one back to you. Huh. 36. This is a simply beautiful film about fathers and sons. From the cinematography and technically stunning camera work to the haunting score to the stellar cast, it was actually Paul Newman's final live-action film. Even this young kid, Tyler Hoechlin, he was great, and he actually grew up to play Superman in the Supergirl TV show. This is one of the films on the list that makes the bar for comparison really difficult to define, so we'll just base it on pure enjoyment factor, which in this case is quite high. 35. Okay, so first the good. This deconstruction of both Iron Man as a series and the Tony Stark character is refreshing and revitalizing to the franchise.
What'd you say? Too fast. Nothing.
We get to spend time in Stark's psyche dealing with post-traumatic stress, all while not relying on his technology. He's stripped of his suits for the bulk of the movie and gets to use his intellect, which is his most powerful weapon. It's definitely the darkest film of the 3, but it can also be the funniest at times. His interactions with the kid in the film are some of my favorite moments. We get some solid performances, Gwyneth Paltrow getting some action, as well as a crazy impressive role for Ben Kingsley. Which leads me to the bad. While Kingsley's performance was outstanding, the treatment of the Mandarin character was seen as a bit of a slap in the face. I don't mean that in a comic purist way, because honestly the Mandarin was never a great character. Just a silly stereotype, so anyone who cries about missing the comic Mandarin is lying. Nobody misses that. Sure, he was Iron Man's main villain, but it's not like they ruined the Joker or something. I mean, in the trailers, he looked like he was going to be such an amazing villain, and I know they were trying to not do the obvious thing and throw the audience a curveball, but then they just gave us the generic bad guy villain anyway in the form of Guy Pearce, so wasted opportunity that missed its own point. All that said, Iron Man 3 is still an excellent film, and the Mandarin thing can't take away from that, at least for me. 34? Doctor Strange is a film about an asshole Lamborghini driver who learns not to be such an asshole. Seriously, if this guy passed me like this on this mountainside road, I'd be like, I hope you crash and lose the abilities that have brought you such good fortune and learn a deep-rooted lesson, you asshole. By 2016, it gets harder and harder to tell yet another origin story without boring audiences, but they did it by writing a great script, getting 4 Oscar nominees in your cast, and take a little flavor from The Matrix, blowing up the protagonist's concept of reality using spectacular imaginative visual effects. My only negatives were a reused soundtrack from Star Trek 2009, and another bland MCU villain.
Maybe.
And 33. This Batman changed everything from the campy 60s TV days and set the bat tone for years to come. Nicholson's Joker was perfect for the tone of this film, and it's really more of his movie than Batman's. I know I give Affleck's Batman shit for being Murder Man, but this Batman killed crap loads of people too. Just when he blew up Axis Chemicals alone, that must have killed a few dozen people right there at least. Kim Basinger had great presence, and her character was really important in grounding the film, not to mention her extreme scream skills. My only real complaint is that it's clear that Tim Burton has never actually read a comic book, but this is very much its own thing, and it's a classic. That about does it for part 4. We are just tearing through this list. How will it all end? And how many complaints will I get for being Marvel fanboy trash? Join us next time to find out for our 5th and final part. Please like and subscribe, and see ya!